The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
A very warm welcome this Monday morning to Scorebox Europe. I'm Steve Sedgwick with Karen Cho, and these are your headlines. The conflict between Israel and Iran enters its fourth day, with NBC News confirming that President Trump intervened in Israel's offensive by rejecting a proposal to kill the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. G7 leaders touching down in Canada with the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine topping the agenda, whilst tariff uncertainty is set to hang over talks between President Trump and other heads of state.
Renault announces Luca will step down as CEO and pursue a role outside the auto industry. With French media reporting he's set to take the helm at Gucci owner Kering.
Israel and Iran are trading airstrikes into a fourth day as tensions between the two countries continue to escalate. We're looking at live pictures from central Israel. Israel's main ambulance service says 4 people have been killed and 87 injured after attacks across the region. Overnight, warning sirens were activated and missiles seen in several areas of the country, including Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Israel's defense force says it launched strikes targeting missile sites in Iran late on Sunday. And in a social media post, the force said sites have been, quote, struck and downgraded, and that it had also completed attacks on military infrastructure in Tehran.
President Trump rejected a proposal from Israel in the past days for the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. A US official has told NBC News Reuters had reported that the president urged Israeli officials against the idea when they said they had an opportunity to kill Iran's top leader. Speaking in a Fox News interview, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not respond to the report, but said, quote, "There's so many false reports of conversations between the US and Israel." Strikes over the weekend have raised fears the conflict could expand to energy facilities. A large fire was seen at a fuel depot near Tehran after an Israeli strike, while Iranian state media says strikes hit 2 natural gas facilities in the south of Iran in one of the world's largest natural gas fields. Iranian leadership also said they would target economic sites, including refineries, with the Times of Israel reporting that Iranian missiles had damaged a major refinery in Haifa.
Well, all viewers will be aware we saw some dramatic inclines in the price of oil products at the weekend. I beg pardon, over the tail end of last week as well. 13% higher for the week for WTI. Brent was up 13% to 74.23. As you can see now, small inclines on those closing levels from the tail end of last week. Torbjorn Solvedt is the principal Middle East analyst at Verisk Maplecroft and joins us now. Torbjorn, thank you very much indeed for joining us. The world is watching. The world is concerned that this will not remain a contained conflict and actually will be exacerbated, will have wider regional and global implications. What are your thoughts at the moment, sir?
Yeah, that's a huge concern at the moment. I think if we look back over the last 2.5 years, and we look at relations between Israel and Iran, what we've seen is, broadly speaking, escalating tensions that has been punctuated by periods of a heightened conflict. We saw the mutual exchanges last April and last October, and so we've had different terms used, generally speaking, to describe that type of conflict. So, shadow war, retaliatory strikes, escalating cycles of conflict. What we have now is very different, and what we're seeing is effectively a war. And an open-ended one. And of course, that is something that has huge implications, not just for the region, but also for energy markets and how they interpret what is happening, minute by minute and day by day.
Torbjorn, I talk about wider conflict as well. in some ways, the Iranians can look at the Russians and possibly the Chinese as some form of strategic alliances. Obviously, the Israelis have the backing of the United States implicitly as well on this one as well. What about the stance of the GCC? I'd imagine it's very important to see what these countries, primarily the likes of Saudi and others, are doing amidst this conflict.
Yeah, it's one of the most important pieces of the puzzle at the moment. What we've seen, over the last 2.5 years is that the Gulf states, the GCC states, have tried very hard to remain neutral. They're trying to keep, gradually escalating conflict at arm's length. Now they're faced with a wider regional war potentially. So far, they've done a very good job of that. They've managed to shield themselves from the fallout. They've managed to keep, largely speaking, oil and gas. And energy assets out of the firing line. The concern is obviously now, as war between Israel and Iran escalates, that they could eventually find this balancing act more difficult, and that they against their will get dragged into this conflict, as if Iran considers its options of how to respond to Israeli strikes and Israel's military operation.
And Torbjørn, there was a lot of debate over the weekend about the timing of the attacks from Israel. Why now? You've been doing some analysis too. Just explain why you think it was a pivotal moment for Israel to strike.
Yeah, I think that there's a number of factors to come into play here. One was obviously, we've heard Benjamin Netanyahu talk about reports that they received of ongoing Iranian nuclear advances, that Iran was getting close to potentially a breakout point and crossing an armed nuclear threshold. I think that's one part of it. It's obviously very hard to verify from the outside exactly where Iran is with its nuclear program. Another part was, obviously, a conflict that has been in the planning for a while, in terms of how Iran's standing in the region, its posture. It's obviously in a weakened position in many sense. We've seen that its main deterrent previously against Israel in Hezbollah has been severely weakened through conflict there. We've seen it's losing its main state ally in the region in Bashar al-Assad in Syria. So it is a lot more vulnerable than it has been in the past. It doesn't have quite that same level of deterrent against Israel that it has had in previous years.
Right. Can I ask you about any vulnerabilities on the Israeli side? Because the missile defense system has been truly tested in recent hours. Just explain any of those vulnerabilities as you see it.
Yeah, I think, again, coming back to that point about this being an open, ongoing war, it's very different to last year when there was sort of two main flashpoints, when you had these kind of limited barrages of missiles and drones that Israel had to deal with. Now it's an ongoing war where there's a constant threat of missile and drone strikes, and we've obviously seen that already. That has caused some serious casualties. So clearly, the longer the war goes on, the more difficult for Israel to make sure that casualties don't mount. So far, missile defenses have managed to strike out most of the missiles that have been launched against Israel, and there's an effort to target Iranian launch facilities to try and limit Iran's impact to hurt Israel that way. But clearly, the longer this conflict goes on, the greater the casualties on both sides, and that's something that the Iranian political leadership and the Israeli political leadership will have to factor in over the coming days and potentially weeks and months if the conflict carries on.
So we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We do appreciate you getting in front of a camera and talking to us about this deadly conflict. Torbjørn Solvedt, who is a principal Middle East analyst at Veris Maplecroft. The Paris Air Show is underway against the backdrop of a deadly Air India plane crash, with the escalation in the Middle East, of course, and tariffs also weighing on the industry. Manufacturers, including Boeing and Airbus, are still expected to ink a series of aircraft orders at the event. There's only one person to cover all of this, and it is, of course, Phil LeBeau, who joins us now with a special guest. Phil, lovely to see you, sir.
It's lovely to be here, and lovely to be with Guillaume Faury, CEO of Airbus, joining us, and also president of GFAS. And this is such an important show for all of you. Let's start first off with the expectation of orders. Coming into this, before last week, we thought this would be a show with a lot of really, really big orders. Seems to be a little bit more muted coming off of the Air India crash. What's your expectation?
I think we are all under this, the impressions and the consequences, the impact of the accident of Air India, and obviously that's a bad situation to come into an air show, which is supposed to be something positive and where everybody wants to meet with each other. Still, the momentum in the industry is very strong. We had a 2023 show here at the Paris Air Show that was exceptional in terms of orders, because we went out of 4 years of COVID. I think it will be a good show, nevertheless. Yes, we do expect important orders, not as much as in 2023. We see also a very different situation when it comes to security and defense, and that's going to be a show where a lot of international delegations will be present. So probably different from 2023, but a very good show.
In terms of the type of aircraft that you see your customers talking with you about placing orders for, why has the wide body had a resurgence, if you will, in terms of importance?
Yeah. Well, I think it's because the wide body market has been more impacted by COVID than the narrow body market. The regional traffic recovered faster than the international traffic post-COVID, and therefore there's more to catch up, and that's what we see now. So we have a lot of demand because it's catch-up game after 4 years of COVID, I think.
You do not break out your production out of your different plants, Alabama versus over here in France. But clearly you're increasing your production and your presence in the United States. Do you expect that to continue over the next couple of years and expand even more, in part because of the trade wars we're seeing?
We're in time of uncertainties, obviously, but yes, I would say we intend to continue to ramp up our production in general and in the US as well. We are proud and happy of our facilities in Alabama, in Mobile, Alabama. Strong performance, supporting our US customers from the US. We like this way of doing business, and we hope that in spite of the trade tensions, that's something we will continue to do.
A year ago, you had the first commercial flight for the A321 XLR. And you said at that time, watch, this is going to open up some new markets. Is it developing as you thought it would?
Well, we're entering into service more and more XLRs. We're ramping up the production. We have a very strong backlog of XLRs. And I think you will see more coming on the 320 family, the very successful A320 family, including mostly on the A321, but also on the A321 XLR.
For the XLR, are you noticing that airlines are now taking perhaps a new look at certain markets where they've always kind of had an interest, but are now saying, now we have the tool to do it?
Yes, that's indeed a product that comes in a very specific place of the market where there is appetite, where there is also curiosity to see how it will develop and what it will enable. But as I said earlier, we have already a large backlog. We're entering into service, and I think everybody's watching how it's developing. But we have very good prospects and expectations for the XLR moving forward.
Last year, when we talked, you said it's not quite time for a fresh sheet airplane. What's the outlook now? Do you see that on the horizon at some point where it's time for you guys to say publicly, okay, we are starting to make plans for this next generation aircraft?
Well, that's actually what we are doing. We are very transparent on the fact that we are putting all our attention on the succession of the A320.
Yep.
Because
but
the A320.
When do we get greater detail on that?
Well, first, about timing. We want to be able to launch the program at the end of this decade for an entry into service in the second half of the next decade. And we have to prepare technologies for the plane, for the engine, the production system, the supplier base as well has to be ready for a major development. So all of this is happening right now.
And finally, you've got a number of operations in China. It's always been a big market, an important market for you. What do you see for that market? It's really robustly rebounded coming out of COVID. What's your expectation?
The Chinese market is roughly 20% of the world market. Has been a bit of up and downs with COVID and the timing. There was not always pure synchronization between the Chinese situation and the global situation, but we continue to see a Chinese market developing at around 20% of the world market.
And so you expect that growth to continue at the pace that we've seen it?
Yes, that's what we expect.
Guillaume Faury, CEO of Airbus, so good to have you here today. And the president of GFAS joining us here at the Paris Air Show. Guys, we will send it back to you.
That's brilliant work, Phil, and we'll of course see you with great coverage out of Paris throughout the morning, where you will be joined by the CEO of Air Lease, and don't miss that conversation coming up on Squawk Box Europe as well. Let's take a breath a moment as well, and just put into context a little bit of what we're seeing. In the early stages of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and I've got the chart in front of me here, and I don't know if we can get a 5-year chart on the price of Brent up, ladies and gentlemen, but in gallery. But we had a couple of instances, first in February and then a little bit later on in the year in 2022, where we saw oil spiking aggressively. And when I say aggressively, I mean up to like $122 a barrel. At the moment, oil looks very much under control. Yes, we had a very big rally last week, and I'll just remind our viewers, we rallied 13% on Brent to 74.23, on WTI to 72.98, similar margin to the upside as well. But you all know this as well, given the fact that over the last few years we've seen minus $37 expiry on WTI, and we've seen $120 on Brent. So you had I'm making a wide range here using two different products, but I'm talking about a $160 swing from the highs to the lows of the last 5 or 6 years. So the fact of the matter is, these moves we're seeing are incredibly contained, and they're basically saying quite a few things. One, that they do believe the conflict can remain contained. Two, that other powers are not going to get drawn into it. Three, the Straits of Hormuz, which I think is a third of all seaborne oil traffic on the planet, has to go through this very narrow choke point, that supply isn't going to be in jeopardy as well. So there's a lot of assumptions the market is making. At the moment they appear sensible, but who can say this conflagration won't get bigger and longer as well?
A couple of points. I think there was an early gift for markets in the form of a big drop in the oil price just a few weeks back on Liberation Day, so-called Liberation Day, very similar size fall versus the big leg up now you've seen in the oil price. So if you take those two big gigantic moves, they almost even themselves out. So one of those stories about a lot of noise to go absolutely nowhere. But to the oil story, I think what we've seen a lot of the commentary suggest this morning is that this is an oil price story, not an equity story just yet. The question is whether it spills across to equity markets that have been incredibly resilient. Just to put a bridge to what we've just been hearing from Phil LeBeau, I think fascinating to see that now, again, another headwind for the industry, for the aviation industry, battling the supply chain issues, now the high fuel price. And don't forget, with all those hedging policies in place, they do not like to see a big step up in the oil price, or indeed a leg lower, because then they're sitting on losses as well. So I think variations in that oil price are incredibly difficult, as well as that story that we've been hearing out of India, the Air India story, very damaging, I think, for confidence again around Boeing and for the industry. And of course, the region been impacted by some flight closures, which adds to the length of some of those flights, but also the cost for the airlines as well, having to fly around regions that are being disrupted. Russia still an issue, Ukraine still an issue. So a lot of different walls to navigate in the skies, invisible walls to navigate in the skies. So I'd say incredibly difficult for the airline industry. We're going to take a quick break. Coming up on the show, a mixed set of data from China raises further questions over the world's second largest economy. More details later this hour. Plus, the Renault CEO, Luca departs the automaker, with reports suggesting he is set for a seamless transition to a new role. And we'll break down how tensions in the Middle East are impacting markets with Deutsche Bank's CIO for EMEA, Dirk Stephan. That is at 8 o'clock London time. Just debating the impact of the oil price for markets before the break, and the reality is markets Friday did take stock the geopolitical threat as Israel and Iran began fighting, and of course that step up in the oil price. So markets were hit, and you can see it was particularly on the Dow. 1.8% lower was the course of the trade, 1% coming off the S&P 500 and 1.3 down for the Nasdaq. Big moving names though, Chevron to the upside. So oil trades did spike, and over the course of the trading week it was those energy names that were truly in front as a sector. That's still where you saw support come into the markets. The financials, though, were impacted by some of those risk-off concerns, and that was the area of some selling taking place. The Asian markets picking up on the trade from Wall Street and some of that red ink as it gets going this morning. We're seeing a bounce. Stocks across in the Japanese market up 1.3%, modestly upbeat for the Hong Kong and Chinese market. We've got a bounce about 0.2% as the Chinese market still digests some weak data on the back of the trade war. And we'll get into the weeds on that, but you can see the market is firmer. But the South Korean market truly escalating too with Japanese stocks. They are both on the front foot. European futures in the mix. So let's just see how we're getting set up for the trading session. Friday, we were downbeat across the board. We saw German stocks down more than 1%, along with French names slightly more contained on the UK stock market. Again, thanks to the energy mix, those big oil trades, we're only down about 0.4% by comparison. This morning, we are chasing a bit of green, much more staggered in terms of this market, flat, as you can see on the DAX, versus a build on that tally market of close to 0.33%. But it does look as though we'll lean positive. And to the US futures, also giving us somewhat of a steer for that US session, modestly unbeat. So looking to recapture some of that territory from the Friday trade, Steve.
Yeah, fascinating, this military parade story and the No Kings protest as well. Let's get some context on it from Jay Gray, because Washington, D.C. played host to a military parade over the weekend. It seems incredibly un-American, I've got to say, in many ways. I mean, it did, though, mark the 250th anniversary of the US Army, which coincidentally, yes, well, do you know what the special day was on the 14th?
No.
It was Donald Trump's birthday.
Oh, right.
He was 79.
So
coincidentally, or not, who knows, also took place on the president's 79th. But I've got to say, as an aside, everyone was worried about his energy levels. You know, obviously just coming off a president who had problems with his energy levels. Let's be brutally honest about it. I mean, that's putting it kindly. That's President Biden. But I've got to say, all those fears are dispelled at the moment. He tweets all the time. He's active over a lot of policy. He seems pretty mentally, sharp as well. I don't think those worries are there yet.
We were just discussing off camera that no age is the same for every person these days. It does depend on how you've run your life, what's the longevity you do have at what age.
Exactly. That's why I'm 38. Anyway, protesters took to the streets across America in a series of events. Now, they called it No Kings, and we'll give some context on that, and follows days of demonstrations in LA, especially against the president's immigration policies. Great package here from NBC's Jay Gray.
Close to 7,000 men and women in uniform marching through the center of Washington. Soldiers representing every era of the Army. 250 years of history. As hundreds of thousands line Constitution Avenue cheering them on. Fighter jets and choppers overhead.
When you see those jets fly over, anybody watching, just keep watching because it's going to be a good night.
Tanks, Humvees, and howitzers rolling past the viewing platform, President Trump standing to salute. A show of military might he's been pushing for since his first administration, playing out on his 79th birthday.
The Army keeps us free. You make us strong, and tonight you have made all Americans very proud. Every other country celebrates their victories. It's about time America did too. That's what we're doing tonight.
But with military equipment, the National Guard and Marines now a part of immigration raids in California, not everyone agrees the country is winning right now. The Refuse Fascism Coalition spilling into the streets of D.C. No Kings rallies, with tens of thousands raising their voices in all 50 states, speaking out against the president and his policies, including the ongoing immigration raids.
Listen to the people. We're not happy, all of us. And it's not right or left, it's wrong or right.
Frustration sparking outrage as sparking fireworks fill the sky over the nation's capital. Jay Gray, NBC News, Washington.
Look, I mean, these kind of military parades, I'm British, so I don't want to be a hypocrite about this, because of course we have a lot of pageantry, a lot of the Guards regiments in their bear skins and their red jackets, and then we have obviously the Household Cavalry and the Blues and Royals. So we like a good parade here as well, but you don't necessarily see tanks on the street. You don't see soldiers in fatigues as well. And the latter tends to be the kind of thing you see on victory parades through the Kremlin or dare I say,
Korea.
North Korea, or authoritarian regimes is where you tend to see overt military parades with all the tanks and the helicopters and what have you as well. So it's a delicate one for a Brit to criticise a military parade. That said, the No Kings protest obviously goes back a long way. It's referring to the overthrow of the British in the War of Independence and the concern that the president has overreach in his powers as well. And there were protests across pretty much every state in the United States.
Well, from the US context, and we've both been to DC, it's about institutions, it's about diplomacy, democracy. It's very different from this big show and tell of military firepower. So I think it was the optics there in DC in particular that was really quite odd for the context. This may play to the audience for Trump far and beyond DC, but it was just really out of the DC DNA to see this type of thing happening there. But I think to the point around the protests that have been happening across in other cities as well earlier in the week, that this was sort of seen as a bit of a pushback to that and somewhat negative. But the reality is we're in a defence era where we see more of these parades. Is Trump just beginning something we may see elsewhere?
Couple of points. The cost, between $25 and $45 million as well. It's not a huge cost, but it's still a cost at a time when the Republican administration is trying to get through Congress the one big, beautiful bill as well. So just a nod to unnecessary spending at a time when perhaps spending is more in focus than it has been for a long time.
So maybe think about that, because if we're now stepping up defence spending in a lot of places, do people want to see where the money's going? Do they actually want to see the firepower rather than just hear that there's some notion that there's defence if it's ever required, but they never see any of the hardware? Wow. Is it somewhat of a marketing example rather to experience to show people what the money is going into?
I don't know. I think you've only got to see a Tom Cruise movie to see that and the cooperation he gets for Maverick or Top Gun with the US military. I think that it's the most powerful military on the planet by a country mile. They put 2/3 of the money into NATO. They are the big spender, and that's a big issue coming up next week, actually, with the NATO meeting in The Hague as well. So, yeah, interesting all round, lots of points. But as I say, as a Brit who doesn't mind a bit of pageantry, how hypocritical is it? But having said that, that pageantry is attached, of course, very much to the monarchy. And ergo, that takes us right back to the No Kings protest. It's multifaceted, isn't it? Anyway, authorities in Minnesota have arrested the suspect in the fatal shooting of a lawmaker and her husband following a 2-day manhunt. Vance Bolter is accused of murdering the state representative Melissa Hortman and her husband, as well as injuring State Senator John Hoffman and his wife. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz said the shooting was an act of targeted political violence.